I love it.
Well, let's do it. Let's switch to our game review. So today we are reviewing Through the Ages, a new story of civilization. This is a game for 2 to 4 players. It has a 120-minute playing time. That seems low. And a weight of 4.41 on BGG. The designers Vlada Shevadl. Artists on the game are Philip Mermak, Radim Peck, Jakub Politzer, and Milan Vavron. And the publisher is Chex Games Edition, which is Vlada's company. So, Alfred, why did you choose this game? Why are we reviewing this game?
Absolutely. It is a painful, beautiful, masterful game that has recently had an evolutionary step. It was the game that we knew for many, many years. And during the online existence, it gained extra cards. It gained an extra dimension of what would essentially be space to explore, leaders to play, space to explore, that changed the nature of the game during this pandemic time. And I feel like it is so interesting to have a game to which it is both like a kind of known entity of there are certain aspects of strategy that we can kind of speak about, but the real idea is that there is a few levers to pull in the game, and those levers were slightly skewed. And to me, that reinvigorated my interest in the game. That changed the way I kind of thought of, oh, this is the way I've played it. This is the way I've explored it. These are the things that will happen in the course of the game. These are the cards I'm looking for. There was that little bit of remix that made it so it refreshed. And I wanted to talk about it with y'all.
Yeah, so this game has gone through a number of kind of evolutions. It was first released as Through the Ages, a story of civilization back in 2006. Then it got a revamp in 2015. And now we have an expansion with the Leaders and Wonders expansion, which kind of like specifically did a power balance on some of the leaders and also introduce some new ones, revise some old ones, introduce some new ones, both leaders, which are an aspect of the game, and wonders, which are aspects. So like the game now has existed for a while, so it's had a chance to kind of get fine-tuned.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important game. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, exactly. It's an important game because it really does represent a twist and a turn on other card similar games. It's not Twilight Struggle, where you have events. It is a game that eschews one modality. It has a conflict aspect, which you are banging on the heads of the people around you. It has one where you're kind of looking at your own board, making changes and evolutions. But there is also a group play where you are not just pinging each other, but you're kind of having to have an awareness of where things are going. It does a bunch of these in a very elegant way, and also in a way that's brutal. And so I think it suits our game group in a way that I don't want to like call us out for, but the laughter I can imagine Paul is doing when he takes a particularly pointed move. It's
sure.
That's the kind of stuff that makes this game, oh, this is like an us game. This is like or when Ben very reasonably is like throws his hands up in our particular instance of a game that we played this week and was just like, oh, I'm going to be the target for a little bit. I felt for Ben, but I also was like, oh, we're now bonding. Like, this is awesome. Like, we're a game group. Not in a mean way, but like in a beautiful...
So let me do my 2-minute for those that haven't played. Let me give you my 2-minute, hopefully, summary of the game. So this is a civilization game. Like, this is a genre. And maybe what felt new about it when it came out was that it was a civilization game with no map. Especially if you think of classic Civilization, like the map is where the game is played for the most part. And like Through the Ages got rid of the map and said it's just going to be about the tech and the interactions, not like where our pieces are on a board. And so it's attempting to model human civilization through the ages. Get it? From like the Bronze Age to the modern age. And everybody, unlike a lot of games that we play now that have asymmetrical starts, everybody starts the same here. Like the only difference is turn order. But then as the game progresses, our civilizations start to grow very different with different powers, different strengths and weaknesses that other players try to exploit. This is a turn-based game. And unlike a lot of games that we play now that have kind of like micro turns that are real quick, where things happen on other people's turns, for the most part, these are big turns. These are kind of like mega turns where you're going to take a number of actions at once and then like submit your turn. At least that's the way we play online. But you might have later in the game like 14 actions over the course of your turn before you hand it over. So this means that you can really spend a lot of time, a big decision space, trying to determine what you do with your turn. And like Paul really enjoys the undo function on the app, which is like you can explore trying different things of how you're allocating your resources within your civilization in order to kind of come up with your optimal build for this turn, and then stuff happens. The game's played over 4 ages: Antiquity, Middle Ages, Age of Exploration, Modern Era. Antiquity is just like the setup. Like it's just like how you determine your starting cards. And then the way it actually plays out is that like I said, you have a number of actions you play on your turn. This grows as the game progresses. Generally, the number of actions you have is based upon the government that you have. But what you're doing on your turn is you're raising your population. You're assigning your population to do certain things. Like I'm forming an infantry unit, or I'm going to make more science so that I have more tech points. You're one of the probably the most unique thing about the game, or the thing that stinks out in my mind, is the way that you get cards in the game. Cards flow into the game based upon what age of the deck you're using. Like say we're early in the game, we're using the age 1 deck. Cards are flowing in on a board in which you have to spend actions to take these cards. And the idea is cards that have just entered the card pool cost 3 actions. They're the most expensive for you to grab. That's very expensive in terms of your action economy. And the longer they stick around, the cheaper they get. So to the point where they're only a single action to take. And then they move off. Like some cards go away and no one ever takes them. But what it means is like the cards don't actually have to be completely balanced, because the players themselves can kind of make decisions of like a really super card. You might spend 3 actions to get it if it's critical to your strategy. It allows a lot of kind of player action in order to balance the game. So you're making these decisions. You're also like choosing a leader that's going to give you special powers and make you different than other people. You're building wonders, which are going to give you special powers. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on.
There's even more, because don't forget, you're also selecting territories, because even though there isn't an aspect of you are placing on the board, but there are these bonus territories that exist. There is all these extra kinds of lands. You're not just making, and they're not just making science, but you're also building all these other buildings that do special things and points. Notably as well, I'll just add this too. Yeah. I'm just
it is a big
that
Civ game. Like
it's a big Civ game, and you don't know what's actually going to count at the end, because that's something else that comes up as cards. There is a separate set of cards that basically will tell you what will be counted as points. You can generally know what's going to be. There's only so many in the game, but at the same time, there is this little variation of like, well, maybe the number of actions are going to be the most points, or maybe the most military will be additional points, or maybe the kind of how much farmland you've made will be additional points. So there's a little bit of variability in that regard as well. That's important.
Yeah, this game definitely appeals to my engine builder mentality here. But it is not a game of multiplayer solitaire at all, because like the engine you're building is then going to compete. And I think we talked about like, both like grabbing colonies, grabbing cards. There's literal wars, which can determine the fate of the game, and aggressions. And then we're going to compete over these scoring events. So, Alfred, is this a competitive game?
Yes. It is a game, though, that requires a lot of knowledge, in the same way that I wondered if it would appeal to you as someone who has built decks in this other parallel world to our board gaming space, these kind of deck games where the card pool that's available, what's out there, what you're playing against relatively. You see the way somebody will come out with a certain deck, and you have a chance to maybe change your strategy midfield because you know what's coming. This game requires so much knowledge for it to be competitive. But when you do have that absolute knowledge, I think it really sings, because you really are controlling tempo, which is a key thing in a competitive game, as well as you are forming a kind of diverging set of strategy or tactics, depending on how you're playing, that can really come to a fruition. You can really make it sing in that regard. But that absolute knowledge is upended when you have these new card sets, as well as there's not really that much hidden knowledge in the game. There's not that much hidden action other than with the military cards. Those are hidden. But most of it's kind of played up in front of the player, where you kind of know what's coming, you know what's on their board, you know what they're building towards.
There's hidden knowledge in terms of what in people's hands, but we actually know all the cards in the game. The game tells you, like, here's the cards we're playing with. And part of the random setup of the game is that sometimes you're playing with certain cards and not others. Napoleon might be in this game, might not be in another game. Certain wonders might appear in some games and not in others. And so for the experienced player, this is kind of like when you wander up to Terra Mystica and you kind of see, well, what are the rewards for the various rounds, and what are the bonuses, bonus rewards you can take when you pass, end up like defining the game. I think there's a thing through the ages where you come up and you say, okay, what wonders are in the game, what leaders are in the game. This is going to push things in a certain direction when you really understand it more.
And that person who can track card use, where every time someone plays an event, a really keen player will track every event that plays and knows the percentage chance of that coming out during another event moment. Because the way it happens is if someone decides not to play a political action, you skip drawing cards from that particular deck. There's no events that come out. But if somebody is engaging in the political action, then they are running the risk of a different political action paying, or like a different event happening. So there is this little push and pull that happens in that moment, where you know that someone played a famine and you know it's coming up, so you don't want to stockpile too much food. This is advanced gameplay, but it really plays into what is this game. This game is, there is a little bit of this like absolute knowledge. Yeah.
Maybe just to clarify your point so that people understand it, and maybe this goes to like my dislike of certain amounts of certain kinds of randomness in games. Sometimes is like there would be plenty of games where there will simply be an event deck, and we'll pull from it, and something will happen. Oh, a famine hits, everybody loses half their food. Like, we've played those games. That's not how this works exactly. Rather, famine is a card that someone got into their hand, and then they chose to add it to the event deck. And these events kind of get queued up. They're going to be like, they're going to go into this pile, then they're going to get shuffled, and then they're going to come out. So Alfred, and only Alfred, knows that famine is in there, and now knows, like, we're now in the window where if I play an action, another event's going to get triggered. So you have that knowledge of like, I got to keep my food stores down. Don't leave a lot of food because that could really nail you. And Trey's sitting over there and he's got 12 food sitting there. And I'm praying for a famine because this is going to devastate his game if the famine comes out. So that's like a higher level of skill that like player input ended up having a certain amount of control on, what comes out with the game. So we played a tournament. We've played some tournaments in this now. Last year, Candace, friend of the pod, Candace Harris, kind of introduced us to a tournament. And what did we find out in this tournament, Alfred?
Oh, we don't know how to play this game.
Or at least we thought we knew how to play this game.
At least we had it. You see, it's one of those wonderful examples. We had an internal dynamic that made us feel like we were getting these like point totals that seemed we're getting point totals that match points that are out there in the world that mean something. We're ending strong. We feel like we're, like all these actions and all these military and all these things. And then you take that out into the real space, the kind of wider space, and you just, it made me feel like, oh, this is a game I have not yet studied. I do not know. I only know my small slice of it.
There are higher levels of understanding, which we have not tapped. Now, just for clarity, we did not do terribly in this tournament. We were not, I think, Paul, like, we were all from the same group. We all kind of did somewhat similarly. It was a round robin tournament within these groups. Like, none of us advanced to the final four from our group of 12, nor were we in the bottom. So we kind of found out, like, we know something, but there's also like a whole nother layer or two of players out there that we are not members of. It doesn't mean we can't get there, but we're certainly not like, maybe this is going to get to competitiveness later on, but like, I think that like the limit on our skill in this game is limited by the fact that we just play with each other. Like, we have to play the better players in order to expand our understanding of the game at this point.
And that's a beautiful thing, though. It really does point towards the fact this is not a solitaire style game. Even though the board is in front of you, you're playing cards kind of hidden. It tends to be your efficiency may not rely on someone else's gameplay. Of course, things like military upend that. But if, say, you're playing a strategy where you're running consistently second in most of the categories, you have a very good chance of winning in this game because you're kind of in stealth mode. People tend to get, pick on the person at the bottom, which tends to make them spiral worse. And we'll get into more about that probably soon. But there is a different level of gameplay that I think is potentially can happen when you get that interaction ratcheted higher up, where it's not just about kicking the person at the bottom to get their few supplies so that you can do better. It's really about knowing when to hit the throttle and to move. And the very critical cards that come out that are powerful, maybe game imbalanced, just in the sense that they're very powerful leaders or wonders, but you know how to mitigate that and play against it because of all the ages. There's certain moments where leaders will take dominant leads and have good strategies, but I think this game really, especially with the new edition, gives you every opportunity to mitigate that if you just know what you're doing. But if you don't, you will be subjected to yet another Michelangelo in gigantic, cultural lead that just runs rings around you. That's a little bit inside baseball, but yeah, that's.
Well, let's talk about this. I feel like this game was a reaction. I mean, back in 2006 or whatever, it was a reaction to previous Civ games, and I think one of the things it's also a reaction to is that it's very hard in this game to bash the leader. Like when you're actually like leading militarily, at least you're kind of invulnerable to other players. And so a lot of other games that we play where people can gang up on the leader, that's hard to do here. A lot of other games where, like some games that we play, if we're playing a 3 or 4 player game and you and I fight, Alfred, typically the winners of that are the other people. You and I fought and we both spent a lot of resources fighting. So the real winners are Paul and Tom. That's not the way this game works, though. Like, there's heavy rewards for aggression and not a whole lot of costs. So when you are the most military dominant power, there's a lot of rewards that can happen. There's a lot of things in the game that can reward you for dominating militarily. And it also means, as a downside of the game, is it's actually hard to target somebody who is defending themselves well. Go ahead.
I was just going to offer too that I feel like this is a game where you're supposed to know in advance of when somebody takes the dominant lead. You're supposed to know that, like, okay, well, they are building towards something. They're playing a leader that goes this way, so I need to starve them of some other resource, be it their food or their iron production. You
can deny them the cards that they need for their engine. That's something you can do. Yes,
but you kind of have to do that as a group. You can't do that as just one individual. You can't recognize it. And so, even though we don't tend to play this game as hey, look at that person over there, you need to play against that person. Maybe that's inherent into the game that we should all be like cajoling each other. There should be some sort of meta game that's happening where we're kind of talking it out. Because when you do put your head down, that's when somebody really does emerge as like, okay, they are unstoppable. Their engine is moving, and the game does not. Other than there's a handful of event cards. There's terrorize or terrorism, and there's like one other one that like gives you the tiniest bit of like, oh,
right.
Like,
there's a few events that kind of do this. Yeah.
It's the
now
it's
just
like
to
very
be clear,
inconsequential.
when you a cultural lead in this game is attackable. It's not like when you're winning, you're unassailable in terms of your points. Rather, I am speaking more like a military dominance. Like as long as someone has the highest military, like there's certain things that just can't touch them. Now you can build up your own military and surpass them, but in order for controlling the game often means being the most dominant militarily, and that's a tough lesson to learn.
I will say that this is where those kind of new deck of cards switches things up. I think there was a certain modality where some of that aggression was very rewarded, and the new cards mix that up slightly, but I don't know if it's a convincing amount. And also there's new emergent strategies on the kind of military side. There's new ways to go now and to be dexterous between the tactics and the military. So I kind of get the idea that it's still a core conceit that you can't lose sight of one of the important levers. You will always tend to do well if you are military dominant. There is a ways to attack points, but there are ways of accruing enough points that you can build some room between you and the nearest competitor that you can kind of lap them, so to speak, and make it impossible, even if they start dinging you at the end of the game. If it's too late, if they hit their military might a little too late in the game, it's kind of tough. But that's a different matter. It is totally attackable. You're absolutely right. And you can see the bloodletting. Once especially blood's in the water, it's a cruel game.
Yeah, right. This is what I kind of called the wildebeest problem of this game, which is that we're all these kind of like carnivorous creatures in this game, and we're growing our military. And woe be to the player who becomes the wildebeest, who other players dominate over, because everyone is going to make a meal of that other player, and that's not a fun thing. But it's a competitive game, you understand that, and so you kind of play defensively. So I'm not saying that like, hey, military is the way to go in this game. That's not at all what I'm saying, but you do need to be aware of like very well like how military works, both in terms of how it affects events and wars and aggressions, and you need to be tracking this stuff so that you don't become the wildebeest, because there's definitely a danger that you can become the wildebeest. We've all been there.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a fun gaming emotional experience when you're the wildebeest in your game among friends.
Well, especially when you're locked in for however many, 120 minutes is optimistic with this game, and you can be the wildebeest pretty quick. And then suddenly, if you get dinged enough, you're going to be in that reverse pole position for a while, if not for the term of the game. You could be that, there's not to say that there isn't fun to be had exploring, but you can just get your buildings get picked off, your leader gets picked off, all these things start to happen to you, and you become,
and it can snowball, right? You can have a negative snowball in the game. And I think like we stopped playing for a while because like there were these kind of like feel bad moments sometimes where it's kind of like, do we really want that among, because like how competitive are we playing? Because we don't want feel bad moments necessarily among friends.
And I've heard this before talked about in the podcast, where this is the difference between the kind of old school Euro model and the new school Euro model. Right. The old school being you would have these punitive games where you could lose in the first round, quote unquote, and you would just, you're there, you're in it.
The splatter philosophy. Yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And then, or even, you see it happen in some 18xx, some critical motion happen, misfires, and you're just like, okay, you're out to sea. But then on the flip side,
you still have 4 hours of gameplay. Yeah.
And then, of course, that's mitigated sometimes because the games are short, or because there are these like different ages or places to make changes. This game doesn't exactly do that. It doesn't totally, like, there's different emerging strategies that happen throughout the game, and there's cards that you can kind of work towards. There is one thing that is worth mentioning, and this is a very specific circumstance, but it's an example in the game where you could be losing militarily, but maybe not so bad down the range of things that you were totally picked on. And then there is this like third age leader of Gandhi, which is maybe woeful that this person comes out as the pacifist, but then you're suddenly shielded from some kinds of attacks. Right. And so there is this strategy of, okay, if I can just make it through to get Gandhi, I can kind of stealth my way without being the military dominant. And I don't know if that's great game, but it certainly is interesting that it's like a specific moment that can happen that can kind of revive and make certain ideas possible. So it's nice that it's built into the game. There's a variety of leaders and wonders that mitigate certain pressure points. So it isn't old school in that way. It isn't like the old school games where you're just like, it is so chess-like that you start losing and you're just like bleeding. But it is really hard to know the right time to do the right thing. And that is makes for wonderful game moments when you do recognize it. But maybe that mixture of like, maybe this is a evolutionary step. This is our Homo sapien forefather or whatever, forebearer that is not quite old school gaming Euro style, but not new either.
No, I think what you're talking about is one of those things. Like, when you understand the game better, you can look and see, oh, Gandhi's in this game. There's a few other leaders like that, where like that can end up meaning like I may not have to be in the military battle so much once I get to a certain point. And then other times you're like, there's no Gandhi. Like, this is going to be a punch each other in the face kind of game, and you want to make sure you're not the the wildebeest. So I think like this dynamic is a negative for some people that have played the game. I think that's probably the case with Ben. I felt like the game Nations that came out, which is very much feels like a response to Through the Ages and has a lot of similar gameplay there, but just kind of like took the edge off of the military and that people got a little less targeted, a little less effect of the military game. Like Nations polished that a little bit so that it was less negative gameplay, which is a game I like very much too, and I kind of get it. I'm sympathetic to getting stuck in a horrible game of Through the Ages, and it seems bad a lot of times when we play that there's like one person who's there, like that feels like too much sometimes. But anyway, Nations feels like a reaction to Through the Ages in that way. So the good and the bad. When you think of this game, tell me the things that you feel like really are wonderful and that we should champion to our listeners out there about Through the Ages.
It's a deep game that with study gives you dividends, gives you a really rich, endlessly variable path to play. That isn't to say that the game changes dynamically or changes radically game to game. There will still be certain things, but I love the fact that you can like, okay, I want to concentrate on this cultural aspect. I want to concentrate on these buildings that I can get. What ways can I continually work in this direction? And through repeat plays, not necessarily do the same strategy because I don't know what's coming out. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what my opponents are doing, but I can kind of mine this in a way that feels meaningful. Now, it isn't like the backdrop of the game gives me this total sensation of, well, if I build up from a church to a bigger church, like that isn't necessarily the most satisfying experience, but there is something about like, building the arena and the kind of libraries that work in concert with these other things. And there's like certain synergies that happen with leaders. And it's a game that just rewards study in a way that I feel like some of the games that we play now are very surface, where there's a lot of deep strategies that occur, but like not these like little specificities and like kind of nuances that can be very, very satisfying.
Yeah, there's a lot of area to explore strategically and tactically in this game. And you can definitely look back at your game and kind of say, okay, I went from Alexander the Great to Leonardo da Vinci to Napoleon to Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Like that's my leader track. Like you end up kind of being defined by your leaders and like what wonders you built. And so you have this incredibly high replay value. And for players, especially like Paul, who like explicitly want to explore the space within a game and may even play suboptimally in order to try something new, like this game definitely has those venues. The downside of that is that it means the decision space to a new player can be very large to a point of paralysis.
Yeah. This game would be punitive towards the AP neophyte who wants to read the text, wants to understand the implication, especially the downdraft, down game ideas that can occur. There's certain things that do feel automatic to a seasoned player, where in the very first moment you're building your iron up because it's going to be really important to someone who has never played before, and they don't. It isn't like it does it for you. They don't build iron for you. Maybe there's some aspects of a really advanced gameplay that would skip this moment, wouldn't build iron because somehow, but it seems like it's almost like an automatic. And so maybe this is a downside, maybe it would be considered, but also I think there's something refreshing about, okay, well, these are the moves and they give you that variable spot. They give you the openness to kind of mess it up for yourself. So it's like generally a bad comment, but then there's some like brightness to that. I like that. I like that they don't.
This is the trade-off that we're going to experience in a lot of games that we end up liking. Is that some of the games that are going to have the highest replay value are going to be the toughest teaches, right? Because there's going to be a lot, and there's going to be a big decision space. It's going to be overwhelming initially, but then once you kind of get over that hurdle, then you're in a better space, not of complete understanding, because then we wouldn't continue to play it, but where we're starting to engage things on a higher level, and there's like these additional pleasures there. I think Ben and I have talked about this a lot when it comes to like 18xx, in that like it's not that I am not a fan of 18xx. I'm just aware there's a kind of hurdle to overcome in learning those games to get to the spot. And like, that's a lot of time and that's a lot of energy. And is 18xx where I want to spend that, because we do have finite time. But I think there are plenty of people that have committed to 18xx, and that's a happy play. That's their Valheim, where they're happy to spend a lot of time playing different games with these slightly different permutations between the different 18xx's. That was definitely a bad. Like, I first played this game, I think in the late 2000s, where it was taught to me at a convention, and I bounced incredibly hard off of it. I was just like, oh, this is just too much. No way. Like, the decisions, like, I don't know. Plato, I don't know. Like,
is it would you call it Baroque? Would that be, would it be a kind of a Baroque game where it's,
I don't know if it'd be Baroque, but I'm just saying, like, I've at times, this has been a narrative that's happened where I've bounced off games initially very hard, and then slowly I came back to them, got to know them, and learned to love them. Like, I did not love Terraforming Mars originally, but like, now I am a convert. I did not, I did not like Through the Ages. And part of it also is like, here's another criticism. Like, the actual physical play of Through the Ages is very fiddly. Like, we can argue about what that word means, but you are moving different colored cubes to represent, my population goes here, and I've got these blue cubes that represent resources, and what, the different things they represent depends on where they are on your board, but you're moving cubes around.
A single sneeze will wreck a whole hour and 20 minutes worth of game.
And that's a tough one when you're learning it. It's like just learning the mechanisms of, how do I need another population, so I'm going to spend this much food. Now it goes here, but now my part of my civilization is unhappy. I don't have enough happy faces in order to keep, but I can take another unit. And like, just in terms of rules and moving the cubes, like, there's a lot. And that's one of the things, like, it's important to understand that, but like, a digital implementation also kind of like takes care of all of that.
It's everything,
right?
It makes it so much more possible to play this game in a not only a deeper level and to kind of read the cards in your own time, be it if that's the kind of way you're playing, but also just to like see how things like tempo can suddenly play a part, where you're taking more cards off the board because you have the capacity to do so. You know what your hand is capable of. You can kind of see the down, especially for things like the colonies that come up, those kind of islands that come up, where they actually, at like a high level of gameplay, they make huge differences. If you know that certain colonies are going to come out, they really can change the kind of way that you can jump like ages, basically, because you have access to resources that are a little bit more advanced, let's say. It's a lot. It's so much. We could kind of go on in all these ways.
Right. So, but I guess one of my points would be that this game is not for everyone.
Yes.
Like, this game does take investment. Like, this game, like, if you're going to learn this game, and I think, if you're listening to this podcast, you should, it will be an investment. There are going to be some painful games along the way. Like, they may also be like, hopefully they're exciting you about the possibility of the space, but it wouldn't at all surprise me if a lot of people try to play this game, don't make it through, or play it once and never return to it. I think that is a distinct possibility.
I will just add too that I think, as a bonus, but as a slight negative at the same time, these dualities, it's not an economic game. It doesn't, as much as you have resources, it doesn't have that economic
engine builder.
Yeah.
It's an engine builder, but it's not. Yeah.
It doesn't have money. And the reason I bring this up as kind of a positive is it's playing in a different space. Just like you were saying, it isn't a Civ game where you are kind of building on a map. There is a sense of discovery, but there isn't this explicit territory. And just with the resources as well, there isn't this kind of hidden economies motion. You can know exactly what people are going to produce. They have those cubes right in front of them. You can see their board. That's not part of the hidden information. It's very explicit. And I feel like most economic games, there's a certain aspect of, this is the money I have. You don't know exactly what it is. Maybe you have a sense of it, a whiff of it, but you don't know what it is. And so you don't, like, it isn't the entire bit of the decision space or the victory points. There's much that's explicit in this game that's right in front of you if you know where to look for it. And that's part of it.
Yeah, especially digitally, it tracks that stuff for you. I can look at Paul's tab and see that he's producing 7 resources per turn and 6 food and 5 science and 8 happiness or 8 culture, like it does that math in a way that in person I think would be much tough. You'd be constantly having to kind of like look over and do the math. And this is important a lot of times because, like, especially if you're going to engage in a war, you kind of need to be able to see, oh, Paul should, can or cannot respond to what I'm doing militarily because he just doesn't have the resources to build what he needs to build in order to respond to me here. So it's nice to have that representation. It just makes it easier because, like, in person, I don't think I'd ever actually want to play this game in person.
Right. This is a new evolution of the board game, right? Because you have the situation where it would be like pulling teeth to constantly ask, well, how much happiness do you actually have? Can I push you into an unfortunate place where you're going to be suddenly struggling? And I'm going to talk to you about this before I do the aggression or not. Like, oh, like this is going to not be fun. Like it even builds on the not fun aspects of this game.
Well, you're the rules lawyer of the group, but I think I may be like the lieutenant rules lawyer in that there are times when we play games where I raise an eyebrow at certain people's moves where it doesn't seem to make sense that they could do something, and you don't know, especially playing with strangers or something like that. You don't always feel like, oh, that was legit. I see you moving a lot of cubes around over there, but I don't really know what's happening. And digitally, I don't have to worry.
That's everything. I didn't enjoy this game expressly for that purpose. That before it was almost impossible to track. It was almost impossible to have that kind of certainty that people were following the kind of great amount of rules that were out there. And also for myself, like there was that dissatisfying feeling of knowing that I had made a mistake maybe however many turns ago and not letting myself off the hook. This isn't a game where a simple error has little implication. Even a simple error, like a small, it has huge implications. And so you kind of need everyone to be the best rules lawyer they can be.
You need the game to enforce that stuff. Like, I'm not saying people are cheating, but like this game has a ton. And like it'd be very easy to misunderstand something and not apply the happiness rule correctly to yourself. And like I'm not sure if I played an in-person game that I would really understand when I just had my population go into discontent.
Right. Or what the difference between famine and rebellion, right? Famine and rebellion.
I guess. Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
I mean, but that's the other downside of the digital implementation. Hold your hand so much that it gets
bad. That's what I know. Angry faces are bad. You can't have them. You need to make them happy, or at least not unhappy. Yeah.
Mitigate. Yeah, and but as a competitive player, you are looking for ways to exploit the times to which your opponent is playing it too loose with too many red faces, or they're playing it like a little too close with not enough food, or these little things that, I feel like at least in the digital aspect of the game, you can play that fairly accurately. You can really look. In person, it probably would amount even more time, if not more pain. So
this game was number 2 on the BGG rankings for 76 weeks in 2011. Mm-hmm. And then the new version hit number 2 again in 2016. And so it's now down to 7. But still, like, this is a top 20 game, and it's certainly been influential. I don't think you'd have a 7 Wonders without this game. So definitely a recommend for game brainers out there to play this game. So maybe as a way of segueing into the member segment here, though, do you think you would enjoy playing this game more competitively against strangers?
Yes, because some of the aspects of the meanness would be mitigated. Some of the aspects of the purity of the gameplay, what is the important parts of the game, I think could be heightened or are heightened. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of wonderful extraneous paths to follow, some really interesting non-winning strategies where you're just building a civilization and maybe playing in that weird sim space of, well, what if Leonardo DiCaprio or Leonardo. Oh gosh, not Leonardo
Da
DiCaprio.
Vinci?
That would be a different game. Yeah, Da Vinci became
Leonardo DiCaprio
Leonardo
is a leader.
DiCaprio. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
got to
Why
be an
not?
alt version out there, sure.
I mean, there's Charlie Chaplin as a leader. I will say this, and this is one other negative. This plays fast and loose with a colonial style history of a European centered. There's like Lao Tzu or Sun Tzu shows up, and like there's like Attila the Hun maybe for a moment, but like largely especially when we start getting into like the Renaissance era and further, like is Bill Gates really better than whatever billionaire is coming from elsewhere? Like sure, in the game, sure, but so there's certain aspects of that I think I would enjoy more. Not that per se, but there are certain parts of just a purity of tournament might really reduce some of that to being like, let's play the most effective game possible.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.